What's going on? I'm Ricky Riley, and today we're going to review one of the world's most notorious solid-state amps, and an amp that's very near and dear to me. This is the Peavey Bandit 112, aka the Red Stripe Bandit. So there are a ton of videos about this amp online, and in most of them they're going to tell you this is one of Peavey's TransTube amps, but no one really ever tells you what TransTube actually is. They talk about it like it's some black magic. I wanted to know, what is TransTube? So I did a little bit of research, and I found a great article written by Hartley Peavey himself about how he developed the TransTube technology. Before I get into that though, don't worry, we're still going to do a full deep dive into all the features of the amp. We'll pull up all the different tones that it can do so you can hear them. But I want to give you a little bit of extra value here. So I'm going to talk about the thing that stuck out the most to me when it comes to the TransTube technology. If you want to know everything there is about it, I'll put a link to the article in the description of this video. But I want to talk about how this amp clips because it's very unique. All right, so here's a little history lesson that's going to lead us to the advent of the TransTube technology that's inside of this amp. In the early days of yore, Hartley Peavey wanted to make amps that were transistor-based or solid-state rather than tube-based. And initially it was a little bit of an uphill battle because he had a bunch of reliability issues he had to work through. But eventually he did, and he got to this point where he was making really great sounding, clean amps. The only downside was that the distortion coming out of these things was really not that good. It was nowhere near what a tube amp sounded like. And he knew, if I'm going to make these transistor amps, they have to sound good when they're distorted. In those early days, people were taking fuzz pedals and putting them in front of solid-state amps, and that kind of got it closer to the sound of a tube amp, but not really, because those circuits don't behave the way that a tube behaves. A tube clips asymmetrically, meaning that the top and the bottom of the waveform are not getting clipped at the exact same time. So those fuzz pedals clipped symmetrically, meaning that the top and the bottom of the waveform were getting clipped at the exact same time. Fast forward a few years later, and Ibanez releases the Tube Screamer, which is an asymmetrical clipping device, and pretty much unanimously everybody decides this is way closer to a tube amp and we really like it. Hartley Peavey says, that's cool, but that's just one gain stage. That's not the way that a tube amp functions. If you have a tube amp, it's going to clip asymmetrically at every single gain stage. So every tube is going to clip asymmetrically. So he decides, what I'm going to do in my amp is I'm going to have every stage of gain in this transistor amp clip asymmetrically. And that combination is going to get me closer to a real tube amp sound. I hope that demystifies the TransTube technology at least a little bit for you. But remember, that's just one element of many. I think like 5 different elements that go into making this amp sound the way that it does. If you want to know everything about the TransTube technology, click the link in the description, go read that article. It's a great read. But enough with the jibber jabber, man. Let's go through all the features of this amp now, and let's pull up a bunch of different tones. We're going to go through every setting this thing has. Let's go. All right, so first up, we got this super slick silver badge with the red stripe that says TransTube Series. The Bandit was actually my very first real amp, and I remember being 12 years old thinking, what the heck is a TransTube? I don't know what it is, but it's awesome. Little did I know, all these years later, I'd find out and I'd be telling you. Moving on, we've got 2 inputs, a high gain input and a low gain input. The high gain input is for lower output pickups, and the low gain is for higher output pickups, like active pickups. Moving on, we've got our clean channel. It's got controls for volume and a 3-band EQ with low, mid, and high controls. And we have 2 voicings on this clean channel, a vintage mode and a modern mode, and you can switch between them using that switch. Next up, we have this channel select switch that allows us to go between our clean channel and our lead channel. You can also use the foot switch that comes with the amp to do that. And then we have the lead channel. So first off, let's talk about this pre-gain and post-gain situation we got going on here. This is a pretty typical setup for a lot of Peavey amps. The pre-gain control is where you're going to get most of your saturation from. So the higher you go with that control, the more distorted it's going to sound. And then the post-gain acts like a master volume. So let's just say I want to crank it up to here to get the distortion sound that I want, but now it's a little bit too loud. I can just kind of dial that post gain back until it's where I want it. After that, we've got a 3-band EQ just like the clean channel with controls for low, mid, and high, and this 3-way selector that goes between the 3 different voicings of the lead channel. In the bottom position, that's the vintage voice, which is the lowest gain of the 3. All the way up, that's the high gain voice, and in the middle, That's the modern voice. The modern voice is a little bit more scooped in the mids, and I'll play all three of those when we get to the playing portion. And finally, we've got the master section of the amp. So all of these controls here affect both channels of the amp simultaneously. We've got a knob for our reverb, which is a real full-size spring reverb tank, a global presence knob, a resonance switch, which is just kind of like a shaping of the low end response of the amp. You can have it loose or tight. I'll show you both. And finally, the mysterious T-Dynamics knob. So when I was a little kid, I had no idea what this did. I just knew that when I turned it down like this, the amp was a little bit quieter, and when I cranked it up, the amp was a little bit louder. Really, what this is going to do is going to interact with the overall volume of the amp. So if you have it all the way at 100%, as you turn this up, it's not going to distort anymore, really. It's going to stay as clean or distorted as you have it set. But when you bring it all the way down, as you come up on the master volume of whatever channel you're on, it's going to introduce more sort of simulated power amp distortion and compression. And it's a really, really cool feature. It sounds particularly good on the clean channel, and I'll show you what that sounds like as well. Around the back of the amp, we've got a power amp in, a preamp out, an effects loop return and send, an effects level switch, so you can switch between low and high, and a remote switch, which is a foot switch jack. We've also got an 8 ohm external speaker output jack in case you want to play through another cabinet, and a handy dandy ground lift switch in case you're experiencing some noise or hum. You can go between positive, neutral, and negative. And it comes loaded with a 12-inch Sheffield 1230 speaker. I think the speaker sounds great. A lot of people talk a lot of mess about this speaker. I don't get it. I'm talking to you, Glenn Fricker. And also, look at that whopping spring reverb tank in there. It takes up the whole bottom of the amp. So that was the infamous Red Stripe Peavey Bandit. And if you asked me, if we're just talking tone, this thing sounds just as good, if not better, than a lot of my tube amps. When it comes to solid state amps, this one is really, really hard to beat in the tone category. It's probably not going to win the all-rounder category because it doesn't have bells and whistles and effects. But if you just want an amp that is an amp that sounds phenomenal, the Peavey Bandit is very, very hard to beat. But let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.